we were told when Prabhupada first heard the Govinda prayers that he cried. I was very moved by them. And then he said, when we greet the deities in the morning, we should play those prayers. And then there was a contingency of devotees who objected. If you imagine it, objecting to, I don't know, maybe they thought that somebody that really wasn't what Prabhupada wanted, or somebody was spreading rumors, or they forced Prabhupada, something. And so they wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and they said that we're hearing the voice of a woman. It was a letter by the brahmacharis, represented by one writer. It said, but Mahaprabhu, in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, heard the voice of a woman, and he ran towards that woman, and his servant saved him. He was about to embrace her. He didn't realize it was a woman. But anyway, Prabhupada said that a brahmachari sannyasi shouldn't hear the voice of a woman chanting, because he might become attracted more to the woman's voice than to what she's chanting. So that was the idea. So they wrote Prabhupada, and they complained that there's so many men in the temple, and we're being forced to listen to the voice of a woman. Did you know that? Did you know that? Yeah. They wrote a letter. And then, in the second part of the letter, and said, this is rock and roll music. Because in this recording, if you listen carefully, there's drums, there's guitar, and there's bass. And without drums, guitar, and bass, you don't have rock and roll. So that's the basis of rock and roll. And rock and roll music is kind of from the lower regions of the universe, generally, right? It's lower consciousness. So that was the second argument. This is rock and roll music. It's rock and roll music, and it's played in the temple room. Maybe if you listen at home, that's one thing. But it's being played every morning in the temple. A woman chanting and rock and roll music. So they thought that they were standing on solid ground in that argument. And Prabhupada would agree. But he didn't agree, because he appreciated the devotion. And so Prabhupada said, no, it's Sankirtan, there are many people chanting together. That was his, it kind of just blew them off, basically. It's like, what? Without saying, this is a crazy idea, and you're stupid, and you're fanatic, and you're just an agitated brahmachari, and, grow up. He just said, no, this is Sankirtan. And it's many voices chanting. So I thought it was very interesting that sometimes, something philosophically may seem so clear, but bhakti's it's more than just philosophy. And Prabhupada, he appreciated so much the mood of this song and the devotion, so much that he was crying, and he liked it so much that he wanted it played. So if your spiritual master wants something, don't object. Don't try to argue philosophy to convince him that he's wrong. And a lot of times, a lot of times philosophical discussions come up, and one thing I always think of the story, and I think, well, what would Prabhupada want? There's arguments on this side, there's arguments on that side, and sometimes the solution is, well, what would Prabhupada want? And there was another story, an interesting story, that, I don't know if you know this, but there was a time in our movement when devotees used to go out on book distribution in Dodi and Sari. The men in Dodi and the women in Sari. Although sometimes we had a man who was coming to the temple in a Dodi, but one day he came in a Sari. So we didn't know what to do, so we wrote Prabhupada. This was 1969. What did we know? So we wrote Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, he's coming in a sari now, what do we do? And Prabhupada said, tell him to decide what he is and be Krishna conscious. practical, right? So we would go out in dhotis and saris. I wouldn't wear a sari, but we would go out in dhotis and saris. And then what happened was we discovered, we used to go to downtown areas because at that time, I don't know about here, but that time in America, that's where everybody was. They were in downtown. That's where everybody shopped. There were no shopping malls. Shopping malls was a new phenomenon. So as the shopping malls developed, devotees began doing book distribution in the shopping malls. It was a new phenomenon in like the 60s. I don't know about here. But it was downtown is where you shopped. So, but by around 1972, we were not allowed to distribute books in the malls. So you'd go in there and then you'd be caught. So the devotees thought, well, if we don't wear dhotis and saris, they won't notice us. It wasn't the idea wasn't if we don't wear dhotis and saris, it'll be easier to talk to people. It's just if we don't wear dhotis and saris, then we go in the mall, we won't be so visible, and we could probably stay longer or stay all day. Security won't notice us. So they started doing that, and then they noticed it was easier to talk to people because they weren't dressed in dhoti and sari. So a lot of devotees didn't like that. They thought this was a sellout and a compromise. They really didn't like it, that now we're wearing Western dress. But it was going on, and Prabhupada, there was a controversy, and it came to Prabhupada. And the book distributor said, well, we're selling more books. So Prabhupada said, then it's okay, just don't dress like hippies. Because we had all come from that background, so he was concerned that we wouldn't dress like gentlemen. So, about 1973, I was with a group of devotees in one temple, and we didn't think it was necessary to dress in Western dress. We thought we could go out in dhotis and saris and do just as well. So we were kind of revolutionary. We wanted to prove our point. So we went out in dhotis and saris for the Christmas marathon, and we did just as well. And we were excited because we thought we are better than those who are wearing Western dress, who don't have the faith that if you just present Krishna consciousness in a straightforward way, people will accept it. So we were a little self-righteous, perhaps a little proud. We just thought we thought we had solved the problem. We solved the dilemma between plain clothes and dhotis and saris. So we wrote Prabhupada, and we were very proud, telling Prabhupada that we are wearing dhotis and saris and we're doing just as well. And we thought Prabhupada would say, good, tell everybody, let everyone know you can do it in dhotis and saris. And Prabhupada wrote us back and he said, if you feel more comfortable wearing a dhoti or sari, then you can do that. That's all he said. And he just deflated our false ego. So it was another incident where you could analyze something philosophically and conclude that this is the right thing. But if your spiritual master doesn't agree, what's the point? And it's so. Prabhupada wasn't going to go with this idea that you're better because you wear dhoti, and that we're going to tell the whole movement you have to wear dhoti and sari. No. Because his pleasure was in the number of books distributed, right? So, nice story. Not many people know the story, only the devotees that were there. It was only like 4 or 5 of us that wrote that letter, so we're really the only ones that know that. But I always found that to be interesting. Okay, so we are, the assignment for today is we are going to summarize. Is that it? Supposed to summarize the 10 topics of the Bhagavatam. You've already discussed them briefly. All right, so it's time for a pop quiz. What do you call those? What do you call it here in England when you go to class and you get a test and the teacher didn't tell you? Call it a pop quiz? Surprise test? What do you call it? Anyway, surprise test is good because this is a surprise. If you don't pass the test, you don't get breakfast. So, now, somewhere on my computer I have my notes, but question is where? Okay, yes. So, in order for me to to do anything beneficial for you, I need to know what you already know. So, can you tell me what you already know? You can raise your hand and I'll call on you. And what have you learned? What have you understood? What do you know so far? So I can kind of know what not to repeat and where we can go with this. You've basically learned what you've had 2 classes, 2 hours of classes about the topic. So you're going to later go into it in depth, right? And then, so what did you learn? The difference between a Purana and a Mahapurana? Did you learn that? 5 topics in a five topics are covered in the Puranas and 10 in the Mahapuranas. And you learned that? And then because Bhagavatam covers 10 topics, it's considered Mahapurana. What else? What else did you learn? You forgot already? It was only last week.
We had a brief insight into each of the 10.
What's that?
We had a brief insight.
Yeah.
Into each
Okay.
of the 10.
So then, did you discuss why, if the Bhagavatam is about Krishna, why you have those other topics that don't seem to be so related? Did you discuss that? And how those other topics help clarify, elucidate, support what's the most important topic of the 10? Did you discuss that? The most important? Ashraya. So how do those other topics help if the most important is Ashraya? And who's the Ashraya? Krishna. What does Ashraya mean? Shelter. Shelter. So you go in an ashram, you get shelter from the Ashraya. You get shelter from the material world. Krishna is the Ashraya, so the Bhagavatam ultimately is focusing on the Ashraya. So how do the other topics help? Why do we need the other topics if it's all about Krishna?
You can perceive the other subject matters. You can perceive the other subject matters. So you can see them or hear them or...
You see them, the other subject matters?
They're perceivable.
Oh, because Krishna is transcendental and these are perceivable. So you can, then what? Therefore you can see Krishna.
No, it's something to help towards.
Help
towards.
Something to help towards.
Towards the unconceivable.
Oh, something conceivable to help towards the inconceivable. So you can deal with Krishna's energies. You can see them. Yes?
And so Prabhu last week explained that everyone in the material world is looking for happiness, but actually the material world is systematically designed to not achieve happiness, so that eventually the living entities become distressed enough to seek knowledge of Krishna. And the Srimad Bhagavatam is a systematic education for the living entities, particularly through the first 9 cantos leading to the 10th canto, which would give us an understanding of the Shrine.
So was he also making the point that if you study the material world, then you'll understand the nature of it and you won't be attached or bewildered? Is that the idea? You understand the nature that Krishna created things not to be perfect? Yes. Also, does anybody know why? It's because the first 2 are creation and subcreation, and you have another one which is what? The planets. That's one of them. One of the topics. Is it planets? So in the Mayapur project, which is the center of the Hare Krishna movement, the world headquarters, you have the planetary systems in the temple. Why did Prabhupada do that? Why did he choose to do that? Anybody know? There's the whole description of the Vedic planetary systems, from the lower to the higher to Vaikuntha, in the temple itself, not separately. It's right in the temple. And that temple is the headquarters of the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada said, in Mayapur is the most sacred place in the universe. So why? Why did Prabhupada want that? Why couldn't he have just written a book? The planetary systems. Why did he want it? Anybody know? And what does that have to do with this topic in the Bhagavatam? Why? It's the same idea. Why? Why do we need to discuss the planets? Does it really matter? What's the answer?
So established the Vedic scriptures have been conclusive, been bona fide.
Establish the Vedic literature is bona fide. Yes, and also, I think you could also say to establish that the Vedic scriptures have a astrological. It's like, I think one of the things that Prabhupada was dealing with is that in Christianity they say God created, and then the evolutionists came on the scene and could often defeat them because they couldn't say how he created. They couldn't present any scientific evidence. And then at some point they said the earth was flat, and the Christians accepted that. And so then, you know the joke? He said, Prabhupada, is the earth round or flat? And he said, it's flat everywhere I walk. You wanted to say something?
Just when Harry Sawyer was making this point last week, that they had some conventional astrologers in India. They all got together with all different shastras, but because they don't really have any knowledge of lifetime, they don't really take it so seriously. Although there's information there.
So what? They didn't have the proper Siddhanta?
No, they don't see that Purana as being.
They don't value it. Oh, they don't see the Bhagavatam. Yeah. So the Bhagavatam, it explains the planetary systems, and you go to Christianity, they can't. The Christians thought the world was flat till it was discovered by who discovered it? Columbus. He sailed, and he didn't fall off the end of the earth. I mean, you look out at the ocean, it looks pretty flat, right? If you get far enough, you just. And then he didn't fall off the end of the universe, and he came back and declared the universe is round, and they taught that in school, that the universe is not flat, it's round. But all the older people didn't change their view because they grew up believing it was flat. So while their kids were being taught it was round, they didn't change their view. But anyway, if you look at Christianity, you want to spread a religious movement, and you want it to spread it on scientific basis. As Prabhupada said, it's scientific. Krishna consciousness is scientific. And he wanted us to spread it that way. And so the Christians, they can't explain how God created. All they can say is, he said, let there be light, and there was light. But in Bhagavatam, as you're going to study the creation and the subcreation. And when you study that, the verses of Bhagavatam explain exactly how the creation comes, how subtle matter becomes gross matter. I don't know if you'll understand it, but at least it explains it. And sometimes devotees say, I can't understand it. And the answer is, well, at least it explains it. So at least you can say, our scriptures explain it, even if you don't understand it. Even Prabhupada said, they asked Prabhupada, he said, I don't actually understand the fifth canto myself. I can't really explain it. But the point is, it's explained if somebody has the brain to understand it and say, here, it's not, oh, God just created. How did he create it? Oh, he said, let there be light. And so Prabhupada wanted to establish another aspect, to establish there's a scientific basis for Krishna consciousness. And here it is. It's in the Bhagavatam, it's in the other Shastras, and we'll establish it in our headquarters. And this is how this is the way the universe is, according to Shastra. And Prabhupada, on these morning walks, when Prabhupada was talking about science, he would always boil it down. He would always boil it down to this idea. He said, either you're going to believe the Acharyas and the Shastras, or you're going to believe the scientists. Because it would be debating back and forth. Scientists say this, Shastra says this, and Prabhupada said so. Who are you going to believe? No, they didn't. Prabhupada said they didn't go to the moon. What? They didn't go to the moon? How could you say that? I was on the morning walk, Prabhupada said it. I was right next to him. He said there was a movie called Godzilla. And he said, and they used cotton, and that was the sky, and they made buildings, and then they filmed it to look like there's this big monster who was destroying a city. He said, so they can do that. So Prabhupada was basically saying they can fabricate that they landed on the moon. Because Prabhupada was a revolutionary and he challenged everything. So he wasn't afraid to challenge. That was his kind of mode of operandi, just a challenge. So he'd have these debates and really challenge our beliefs. Very strongly challenge our beliefs. And sometimes he would say, you're brainwashed by the scientists. And he liked to challenge our beliefs. And then he would make that conclusion. So, what do you accept? The scientist or the Vedas? So, if there was no explanation of how the world was created, if there was no explanation of how the universe was situated according to the Vedas and Bhagavatam, then on what basis could we say that we understand God completely, and on what basis could we say that we have all scientific knowledge? We couldn't say that. Right? Couldn't say it. And if you want to say you understand God, you have to understand everything he does. Not just his Leela, his personal Leela, but how he does everything, how he creates. So Prabhupada in the Bhagavatam said, how Krishna creates is also his Leela. So we hear about Mahavishnu, right? The universe is coming from the pores of the skin, and Prabhupada said, don't think this isn't Leela, and don't think you have to skip over this. I just want to get to the Rasa Leela. Let's go to the 10th canto. Why do we have to read about Mahavishnu creating? Prabhupada said, that's also his Leela. It's his creation Leela. And so we need to learn about how he creates. And then, as you know how he creates, that means you just know more about him. This is how he does things. It's kind of, if you think about it. How does Krishna create? He's in Vrindavan and he's enjoying Leela, but he's creating. That's pretty cool, isn't it? If you could do that, wouldn't you do it? So I have this huge business. How do you do it? Well, I just expand myself. And they run the business. But what do? I play golf and tennis. I go sailboating. I go to the horse race. Play my guitar. Play piano at home. And everyone else does everything, right? It's cool, isn't it? So that's what you're learning about Krishna, how he does things. And now, it's really interesting because the Christians have this idea that God is up there in heaven keeping score of piety and sin. And so that when Judgment Day comes, you'll meet him and he'll open the book, right? Find your name. Here's your name. Yamaraj has his book, right? What's your name? He'll find your name and say, okay, heaven or hell, right? That's what God does. I mean, for a devotee, that, for someone who understands Krishna through the Bhagavatam, that is like inconceivably dumb. That's how God would spend his time, right? Keeping track of sin and then, oh, this one goes to hell. And he was so bad. I can't wait to send him to hell. He's not like we are, isn't it? And so I ask people, the people say, what is God? I say, if you were God, what would you do? Would you sit around? Would you be an old man with a beard if you were God? I mean, you're really old, right? You must have a long white beard. You must be pretty wrinkled because you're billions of years old. You must look really horrible. And does God have arthritis? Because he's so old. And so they have these pictures of God sitting on a throne, long beard, gray hair, lightning coming, striking the world. So if you have Bhagavatam, you read Bhagavatam, then you understand that's not God. God doesn't have to get old. We have to get old. So like you're saying you study material nature, and then you understand that's what material nature does to us, but it doesn't do that to God. So I ask people, if you were God, what would you do? Would you be an old man with gray hair and sit around with your related? What would you be shopping at the Mac store so you get the fastest Mac because you can keep track of sin better? What would you be doing? Or would you be creating beautiful women and going out with them and dancing and creating mansions for all your friends and playing? Or would you be working hard and getting old? So the answer is obvious. If I were God, I'd be creating a lot of beautiful girls and enjoying them, wouldn't I? I mean, right? So that's what he does. But you can't understand that unless you read the whole Bhagavatam first. Understand whatever else, all the other things he does. So first you understand he creates by expanding himself, but he's in Vrindavan with his friends, and the whole thing's going on because he's got unlimited power. And you understand scientifically how the creation's going on. It's all explained how matter manifests from subtle to gross. Every detail of it is explained so well that most of us, when you discuss it, you'll all be scratching your head. Can you explain that again? False ego in connection with the mode of passion creates ether, which in closer form creates sound. Can you explain that again, Prabhu? Just what is false ego? It's an element. Could you explain how false ego is an element? It's a material element. False ego is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence. False ego. The conception that I'm the body is a material element. Prabhu, could you explain that? You get all the biggest pundits in ISKCON to have a whole meeting. Could you explain how false ego is a material element? It's difficult to understand, isn't it? So, in a sense, it's also Krishna's glory that we don't understand. It's just, he's so smart the way he does things that we can hardly understand it. But at least our scriptures explain it, so we can say our scriptures explain this. If you have the brain to understand it, it's there, right? So then, how does that relate to Ashraya? It just glorifies. It's part of his glory, right? Everything in his creation is just part of his glory. And one of the things that I think is essentially important is that verse of Bhagavad Gita, Janma karma chamedevyam evam yoveti tattataham. You understand me in truth. So you need 9 cantos of Bhagavatam to understand the 10th, because otherwise Krishna's hanging out with his girlfriends. That's not going to make any sense at all. And so when you see Krishna with the gopis, what do you think? You think, hey, I want to get some of my own gopis, right? And what do people say? That's not fair. How can you say God has girlfriends? That's not fair. That's not right. Why do people say that? Because they want them. Isn't it? But does a devotee say that? That's not fair. Krishna has so many wives that he's dancing. No. That's what purifies the devotee of his desire to have thousands of wives. Right? There's a painting of Krishna in Alachua. There's a painting of Krishna with the gopis playing water sports in the Jamuna. Right? So, on television, when somebody's doing something that's dangerous, they say, don't try this at home. So I tell the devotees, I said, the title of that painting should be, don't try this at home. Because we try that at home. That's the trouble, right? We try to be Krishna at home. He's dancing, he's playing with the gopis in the Jamuna. And so men want to, with it, like Nalakovera Manigriva. They're doing that. So when you understand the tattva Krishna in truth, then when you see Krishna with the gopis, it completely purifies you of your desire to do that. Because you understand who he is now. He's the one who created everything. He's the one who has all these leelas. He's the form of all these avatars. He's Ram. He's the personification of Dharma. And now you read in the 9th canto, Ram, the personification of Dharma. Now he appears as Krishna and he's shooting water at the gopis. So now you understand that has nothing to do with any, that is beyond, that Dharma is just Dharma, Artha, Kama. It's just the first stage. Dharma, of the 4 principles of human life, and then love of God's the 5th stage. So Bhagavatam it's way beyond Dharma. But you have to understand Dharma to understand how Krishna can be adharmic and at the same time be completely dharmic, and how his adharma will create Dharma within us. Otherwise, if you don't understand all the other subjects of the Bhagavatam, it won't make sense. And then you'll just say, why does God do this? You know that story, when man complained to Prabhupada? Why God has so many wives? Why God is stealing other men's wives? Prabhupada said, every woman is God's wife, so you've stolen your wife from him. See, that's the proper understanding. Every woman belongs to Krishna. So any woman you have, you've stolen from him. And then, who are the gopis? Who is Radharani? So you learn in Bhagavatam about Krishna's energies. He expands into different incarnations, plenary portions. But that's another topic. You know, you read in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, it's described a whole science, different kinds of expansions to do different things. It's like you could take a whole science class on Krishna's expansions. But who is Radharani and who are the gopis? They're his own expansions. So now Krishna's really playing with himself, because he expands from himself. Right? Isn't it? Isn't Radharani an expansion of Krishna? And aren't all the gopis expansions of Radharani? So all Krishna's really doing is playing with himself. He expands himself and then for his own enjoyment. But if you come from the mundane point of view, then you see it as ordinary lust, right? It has nothing to do with that. So you have to understand that through the Bhagavatam. All the incarnations. So all the incarnations are described. The Leela avatars. Isn't that one of the topics? Leela avatars. So you understand this whole science about Krishna expands, and then you come to the 10th canto and you see that when he's playing with all these Shakti Tattva, his eternal associates, they're just expansions of him. It has nothing to do with boy and girl. But if you don't understand that, then when you see it, then you just see boy and girl, and you become agitated, disturbed. It's completely transcendental, and it totally purifies us by hearing about those pastimes. So basically what we're learning is there's a high qualification to understand Krishna's pastimes, and if you understand them in truth, tattva, then you're liberated. So it's kind of like you won't, unless you're liberated, you won't understand them in truth, and if you understand them in truth, you'll be liberated. It's like, you know, it works together, but you need that understanding. In the early days of the movement, not so early, but maybe 75, there was a group of devotees, and they understood that the highest pastimes were the pastimes of Krishna with the gopis, so they had reading groups, like you're doing your reading groups, and you're reading Bhagavad Gita, well, they were reading Gopi, only about the gopis. That's all they read. And so some devotees thought that this is not right. And eventually came to Prabhupada. And their argument was that by hearing about the gopis, you'll be pure. Prabhupada was saying, this is not right. This will end up, the men and women were reading together, and Prabhupada said, it'll end up that women will become pregnant. That'll be the result of them hearing about the gopis. And they said, Prabhupada, but the argument that this is the highest pastime and you become purified. This is the most purifying pastime, because if you understand Krishna's pastimes with the gopis, then you become completely purified of lust. And Prabhupada said, but in their stage they'll become putrefied instead of purified. They'll become putrefied because they're not qualified yet. And so Prabhupada said, why are the other cantos in the Bhagavatam there? Why are the other Leelas there? Is it just Krishna has one Leela? But then you understand, what you understand also from the Bhagavatam is that the Leela with Krishna and the gopis is the highest, so that's the culmination. And every other Leela, every other relationship, it all supports that relationship. It's like Mother Yasoda, who did she get to cook for Krishna? Radharani. So now she's helping in the pastimes indirectly of Radha and Krishna, right? And the Gopas, what do? They take messages to the gopis and Radharani. They're taking part in the pastime. So everybody's supporting that in whatever position it's in. So it's true, it's the highest, but it doesn't mean that's the only focus. And especially, Prabhupada said, it doesn't mean you don't focus on the creation pastimes. Oh, this is just creation. This is boring. I don't even understand it anyway. I want to get to the nectar. No. Okay. What else did you learn? Anyway, this is important, to understand Krishna in truth. It's very important. What else did you learn? Anything? You remember? Yes.
I don't know what you're referring to, but if you could just add that Ramananda told me one time that Prabhupada had said to him, this verse, Janma Karma Chimeti Dhyam, is the most important verse in the whole Bhagavad Gita.
Wow. I'll have to repeat this for the internet. Brahmananda, Prabhupada told Brahmananda the Janma Karma Chame Divyam verse, which we're discussing. One who knows my pastimes in truth. That's the most important verse. So, how will you understand the pastimes? Through the Bhagavatam. I mean, one of the most interesting things is, because the Bhagavatam is talking about the devotees. And the Manvavatars, they're all great saintly kings. So how do you learn bhakti? You learn it through the devotees. How do you come to understand the tattva about Krishna? It's through the love of the devotees. And that's why Krishna sent Uddhava to Vrindavan. Because Krishna was with Uddhava. So you think, well, if Uddhava is with Krishna, he should understand everything about bhakti. But Krishna said, go to Vrindavan, then you'll understand everything about bhakti. So you want to understand me in truth, then understand what a pure devotee is. And so the Bhagavatam is full of stories of pure devotees, right? Because then you understand devotion. Otherwise, people will think they love God because they have no standard to judge it by. So they go to church. I just got a new car this week. I got a raise. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Amen. Then you think that's love of God. Whoever got the biggest car and the best job this week must have the most love of God. They got the most mercy, right? In the Hare Krishna temple, you go, I lost my job this week. They repossessed my car. My wife left me. Praise the Lord, Prabhu. Krishna's mercy on you. So you see stories in the Bhagavatam and how devotees dealt with situations like this. So then you understand what is devotion. Otherwise, how will you understand devotion? You'll just create your own idea of what devotion is. It'll just be some sentiment, right? I love God. So many people say that I love God. Prabhupada was on a morning walk and he played the part of someone who said, I love God. You know that morning walk? It's a challenge, I love God. So the devotee's saying, no, you don't. If you love God, this, that, and the next thing. Prabhupada just, no, I have my own way. This is how I do it. And nobody could get the argument until one devotee said, if you love God, why don't you follow what he says? The Prabhupada said, that's the argument. So otherwise, if you don't have examples of devotees who are pure to say, this is what love of God is, then how do you know? So Bhagavatam is full of stories. And not only that, the devotees are in situations which we are also in. So we can see, oh, this is how I'm supposed to act in this situation. This is how Ambarish acted. This is how Prahlad Maharaj acted. This is how Maharaj Priyavrata acted. He didn't even want to get married, and they forced him to get married. What did he do? How did he deal with that one? Interesting, isn't it? Like we were having some classes in Mayapur, and Bhaktivedanta Purnaswami was saying, if you look at the Bhagavatam, it's like everything that could possibly happen to any of us in this world is happening to devotees in the Bhagavatam. You say, but Prabhu, I had a very nice life before as a devotee, and Krishna took everything away. It's really hard. And say, wait a minute, Bali Maharaj had a better life than you. He had way more than you, and he had way more taken away than you. So there's these extremes in the Bhagavatam. So anything that is going to happen in your life, it's already happened to devotees in the Bhagavatam, but more extreme. They had way more wealth, and they had more taken away. So you can't say, but Prabhu, I came from such a high-class family, and now it's so difficult living in the temple. So wait a minute. Look at these devotees. Look at these kings. They had way more wealth than you, and look at how they dealt with it. So every situation we have to go through, it's there in the Bhagavatam. It's discussed. So then you understand, okay, what is love of Krishna? They don't have to concoct it, be sentimental. This is it, and this is how I deal with this situation. Everything, right? Every trouble, every difficulty. Does Indra have trouble? He has all kinds of trouble. Right? And he gets himself into trouble. So then you see. And then he's remorseful. How does he deal with it? He asks Krishna to forgive him. Pride. Brahma becomes proud. Do we become proud? Not do we become proud. Are we ever not proud? So there it is. Brahma's there. I'm creating. I'm praying, please. I don't become puffed up when I do this. Everything's there. So we learn through the devotees how to love Krishna. And then you get to the 10th canto, and there's the gopis. And then you learn about that kind of love. So, what else did we learn? Anything? Yes, yes.
Last week's class, he mentioned about material scientists and the kind of things that they say that life comes from matter and it's actually.
Yes. That's a, so Hari, you were saying Hari was saying that I'm talking about the scientists and life comes from matter, and I found something really interesting that. As we know, in the world of modern science, one of their hopes is to not only extend life, but perhaps make life permanent, or find, what do they call it, some particle, the eternal part. What's that? So what's that, the eternal particle or something?
This is it.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're kind of dumb. Who wants to live here forever? It's like, you know, things are getting pretty bad fast. Why would you want to be around a couple hundred years from now when someone's trying to, now they're just trying to steal your wallet, then they're going to try to eat you, So why would you want to be around, You take the pill, you can live forever, then you'll have to, curse all the scientists who created the pill because you're, 50,000 years from now, it's cannibalism and you're still on the planet. And, they're eating you, but you don't die. So that's number one foolishness, right? But it's all linked into this idea that there's no soul. So if you don't live here, then that's it. If you don't live in this body, then it's finished, right? So now, taking the perspective of the scientists who want to make things eternal, or find the eternal particle, or create life, or do all these amazingly stupid things that they can't do. Why are they thinking that way in the first place? Because they're thinking this is all there is, and if we don't figure out how to live here as long as possible, we have nothing. We're finished. When we die, that's it. We're not a soul. Now, you taxpayers, you have to pay all this money, and the money, part of the money you pay in your taxes will go to this foolish research in the universities, in the big, respected, prestigious universities of the world, who will be doing research how to make matter, turn matter, and make it eternal. If we just figure out what's the missing chemical or whatever is missing, right? Or the missing law we haven't figured out. Something. We're going to try to make matter eternal, right? Now, if you read the Bhagavatam and you understand these 10 topics, would you be wasting your time trying to make matter eternal? No, because you would understand matter's not eternal, because you've understood how the creation comes. And how Mahavishnu glances into matter. If he doesn't glance, what does matter do? Nothing. It's called pradhan. It just sits there, right? So if you understand pradhan, it's a subtle form of matter. It just sits there. There needs to be a glance, and then the three modes of nature come, and then it starts activating. Then you understand the nature of matter, and then it's wound up. It's just subtle, gross. And then you understand the nature of soul, spirit. So that if you understand the nature of matter and spirit, would you be wasting your time in a laboratory trying to make matter eternal? No, unless they pay you a lot of money. This is a good job because we can never prove this. I got job security here. We're never going to do it. So, we'll always have a job. And if you're really smart, you say, I just need more money. I think I almost have it. Give me more money. And if you can't do it, no one will blame you, because it's impossible. So, the foolishness of the material scientists is based on their lack of understanding of matter. Whereas you go to Bhagavatam and the Gita, You understand the nature of matter, right? And in this first subject, which is the creation and the subsequent creation, it describes matter completely, doesn't it? Total understanding of matter. And then once you understand it, you'd never be stupid enough to think, okay, we're going to turn this into something eternal, right? Because you understand there's another energy, which is already eternal. You don't have to make matter eternal. There already is an eternal energy, but they deny it. So now they're in the laboratory trying to make matter eternal because they denied that there's another energy that's eternal. Is that stupid? And these are the guys who get the Nobel laureates. So what does Bhagavatam say? The dogs, hogs, camels, and asses are praised by other dogs, hogs, camels, and asses. That's the world we live in. It's insane, isn't it? Like, what sane person would want to live here when these things are going on? We have a big party to honor the person who's doing this research, and someday we'll discover, the eternal particle. This is what Prabhupada came to challenge. So this is the advantage of understanding the Bhagavatam, because you understand the nature of matter and the nature of spirit. And you wouldn't try to create spirit out of matter. You understand that, right? So that's a very good point. As we know Prabhupada didn't like the scientists very much because they were atheistic. So he really very much wanted to expose them. I don't know if you know that, but when Prabhupada was here, he had established the Bhaktivedanta Institute, and he had arranged that the BBT would fund them $10,000 every month to fund their work. He was so into that. And this whole project in Mayapur, centered, it's just to expose that folly. Like, what do you know? What do you know? You're postulating on how the universe created. Were you there? So you make some model and try to, create the conditions you believe that existed during the creation. And with the other breath you say, you can't believe anything unless you see it. Excuse me, did you see the creation? Were you around? You have photographs of them? It's the ultimate hypocrisy. So Prabhupada would always challenge that. And on what basis did he challenge it? The Bhagavatam, because it's all explained in the Bhagavatam. This is all foolishness. That's how he challenged it, right? Isn't it? On the basis of the Bhagavatam. And he liked it when devotees challenged scientists. He really liked it. So that's a nice point. What other points? Ladies, do you remember anything? Yes?
Developed this idea that the perspective is very important in our daily lives. So the perspective is whether we look at something from bottom up or we look at something from the top. And the perspective would be a spiritual perspective. So how to see the spiritual in everyday occurrences, rather than a perspective which is a material perspective, which is the fathomable, that in day-to-day lives we have to have a vision which is from bottom up.
Yes, that's a good point. And then I'll add to that something interesting. The universe, the explanation of the universe, which doesn't seem to make sense always. And why doesn't it make sense? So they're saying this planet is here and that planet is here and this planet is going around this one and that one, and from our perspective it seems that planet is not there and this planet is not there, and so it's a different perspective. They're not looking at it from the earth. So that's also another explanation. Looking at it from a different place in the universe. So then they have they're describing it differently because that's their perspective. Yeah, and it's a good point also, because if you go back to the point of how you learn bhakti through the lives of devotees, then you get all your perspective. What What was Ambarish's Maharaj's perspective on Durvasa Muni? Was his perspective on Durvasa Muni that Durvasa Muni was a bad person? Because Durvasa Muni tried to kill him because he drank water before he fed Durvasa? Was that his perspective? No, but that would be the perspective of an ordinary person. You know, a guest shows up. He's called a titi, uninvited guest. According to our Shastra, if a guest shows up, a guest is treated like God. Everything stops and you take care of them. So Durvasa was a titi. He was a guest. He showed up with 50,000 disciples. And so Ambarish said, okay, just give me a minute. I'll cook for you all. So Durvasa had been fasting, I think. I mean, Ambarish had been fasting, I believe, like 40 days, and he had to break the fast. So he consulted, and the decision was made that if you take water, I think he went in the water and drank some water. So if you take water, it'll be considered that you didn't break the fast, but it'll also be considered you broke it, because you need to break it by this time. So Durvasa is a mystic, so he understood. He actually drank water. So the etiquette is, you feed your guests and then you eat. So he broke this etiquette. And Durvasa is what? A partial expansion of Lord Shiva in some way. So he is, Lord Shiva is easily pleased and easily angered. So Durvasa has that nature. So he got very angry. He got so angry he tried to kill Ambarish Maharaj. He created a demon who would kill him. And then the Lord protected Ambarish with his Sudarshan Chakra, and that Sudarshan Chakra chased Durvasa, and Durvasa went all the way up to different personalities asking them, please protect me. And they'd said, no, I can't, go to Vishnu. So he went to Vishnu, and Vishnu said, I can't protect you. You offended my devotee, you have to beg forgiveness. And so Durvasa said, please forgive me. I mean, Durvasa obviously understood he did something wrong because his life was in danger for offending a devotee. So it's pretty clear, right? Like guys, you know, sometimes you don't think you say anything wrong, but you say something to your wife and she goes in the room and she breaks down crying, or she gets out a pan and knocks you in the head. And then when you get hit in the head, you realize, I must have said something wrong, but I just don't know what it is. But I know it must have been wrong. So that's how you know. So Durvasa, you know, he wasn't really thinking he did anything wrong, but he got the message when the Sudarshan Chakra was following him. Yeah, you did something wrong. So it was easy for him to apologize because Lord Vishnu said, I can't forgive you. You can only be forgiven by the person you offended. So he offended. He came back and apologized. And basically Ambarish said, apologize for what? Amazing, huh? Like, you didn't do anything wrong. No. So there's a perspective right there, isn't it? Talk about perspective. That's a perspective. Somebody tries to kill you, and your perspective is just, you know, whatever happens is my karma. I just deserve it. You really didn't do anything wrong. It's the way it's supposed to happen. But the most interesting thing of the story is that after Durvasa came back and apologized, Ambarish didn't say, well, you know, that was pretty heavy what just happened. You know, you almost killed me. And, you know, my family's pretty upset about that. You know. And, you know, the invitation's off. So just, you know, just get out of here. Take your disciples and get out of here. He didn't say that. He said, okay, come in. And he fed them. Isn't that interesting? Somebody tries to kill you. You say, you didn't do anything wrong. And then you're perfectly okay. And you just serve them for something. Would you like a little more? Is anything? Is that inconceivable for a perspective? That's amazing. So what is that perspective? This perspective is Krishna's in control. Whatever happens is his arrangement. And even someone offends me, it's just, you know, I deserve it in some way. That's the perspective. So when you study Bhagavatam, you definitely get perspective. Now, one of the problems that I find, it's a huge problem, and I think it affects all of us, is when you read that story, you think, I could never do that. That Ambarish is, you know, Ambarish is listed as what? One who engaged in the 9 processes for what is Ambarish, one who surrendered everything. So he's Ambarish. You know, how do you expect me to do that? And so we read the story, and we almost like use the fact that Ambarish Maharaj is Uttama Adhikari to write off the fact that I can't do that. It's like, it's my excuse. Well, that's him. Don't expect me to have that perspective. Don't expect me to respond like a pure devotee. Prabhu, I'm just a malecha, yavana. I have a really bad background. I took drugs when I was young, you know. I used to like the Rolling Stones. That samskara has destroyed me. You know, I'm useless. That's the way we often take things. And here's exalted devotee. So it's out of my league. So because it's out of my league, I don't have to follow that example. But then we'd have to ask the question, why did Krishna put those stories in the Bhagavatam if they're not for us to follow? If they're us to sit, if it's just a nice story. Well, it's a nice story. What time's breakfast anyway? You know, is that it? You know, it's a nice story. But anyway, what's for breakfast? You know, we have dessert today. Is that what I'm interested in? Do I get anything from that story, or just write it off? Well, that's impossible. That's you know, for pure devotees. We'll worry about that later. No, but that would be a mistake to think that way. But we understand the principle. Okay, somebody tries to kill you. Maybe you'll be a little upset. Maybe you don't want to invite him back for dinner. But what's the principle? Nothing happens without Krishna's arrangement, and I have to accept it. That's the principle. So we're, you know, maybe you can't be Ambarish, but you learn the principle. And if we don't learn the principle, then we don't take full advantage of that portion, those portions of Bhagavatam where these great devotees set these examples. What is that example? What are they teaching us? Okay, you know, your father's trying to kill you, and you just sit there and chant Hare Krishna. All right, but what's the lesson? Maybe I can't do that. Maybe I would defend myself. Maybe I'd run away. Maybe I'd scream, Krishna, help me. But what's the principle? Krishna is the ultimate protector. Ultimately, you can't protect yourself. You have to depend on Krishna. That's the principle. So that's what we learn, right? You know, if you're thrown off a mountain, it might be kind of scary. Well, how high was that mountain that Prahlad was thrown off? Anybody know? I always have this 80-mile mountain in my head, but that was Krishna Balaram jumped off an 80-mile mountain. But anyway, obviously it would be scary. But what's the principle? Krishna. My only shelter is Krishna, right? Gajendra, my only shelter is Krishna. Prahlad, my only shelter is Krishna. So, is that one of the principles? Krishna is the shelter? Yeah, so then these stories, the principles are in the stories. So we should take the stories that way, understand the principle. Can't imitate. Do you know that when Prahlad was thrown off the mountain, he was caught at the bottom? Do you know that? Who caught him? Durga? Mother Durga, I believe? It wasn't Krishna. I think it was... What? What, you sure?
That's what I understand.
Anyone read the Nrsimha Purana? It's there in the Nrsimha Purana. Because I thought it was a female goddess. Anyway, somebody caught him. That's how he was saved.
Because he saw that he was falling to Mother Earth.
Oh, Mother Bhumi caught him.
He saw that
Yeah.
he's actually
Yeah, that must have been Mother Bhumi.
he's falling to Mother, but I don't know if it's
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Anyway,
Mataji was telling us, Bhumi,
that's true. Bhumi caught him. Yeah, all right. So Mother Bhumi caught him. Of course, different Puranas will, the stories are different in different yugas, but at least in one yuga, Mother Bhumi caught him. So, yeah, that's nice.
She wanted to marry Bharati, and that's how when Bharat knowledge was thrown from the cliff, then obviously Bharati's father.
Oh. So Varahadev and Bhumi were married, and so Bhumi is the earth. The mother was saved by the father, and then the mother saved Prahlad. Something like that.
because that Prahlad was not afraid when he was thrown from the top of the cliff. So instead of seeing the fearful situation, he actually saw that it's the arrangement of the Lord and it's his mother down below waiting. So similarly, like when he was saying, he was thrown into the pit of the snakes. So then Hiranyakashipu said, these are the most poisonous snakes. How is it you're still alive? How is it you're not destroyed? And he said, Anantashesh, he saw the fact that
He saw Anantashesh in the snake. Yeah. Nice. Nice. Yeah.
The perspective is that he's actually seeing the protection.
Yes.
He's seeing a higher perspective
Yeah.
than audience.
There's also a story of during the time of partition in India, they would have I think the sirens would go off, and then you turn your lights off and close your window shades because they were coming in, I guess, to bomb. And siren went off. I think there was an interview with Prabhupada, and he was asked about that. Maybe it was a current event or past event, I don't remember, and Prabhupada said, so what about the bombs? And Prabhupada said, we see them as Krishna in the form of Kala. You know, you just see Krishna everywhere. So this is a nice story of Prahlad. He's always seeing Krishna. Perfect. And like the same thing, the poison in the prasadam. The poison in the food, he offers it. It's prasadam, it's not poison. But the interesting thing about this is that this conversation came up, and Prabhupada was asked, he said, you know, this prasadam that we're eating, sometimes it's very spicy and devotees get sick. And so what do we do? And Prabhupada's saying, you should see it as prasadam. And so he's giving an example, either the devotee asking the question or Prabhupada was giving the example that Prahlad had so much faith. His faith was such a high degree that even the food had poison in it, he offered it to Krishna. And then he took it as prasadam, and he didn't get sick, he didn't die. But then Prabhupada said, but you can't imitate that. He says you have to act according to your realization. So if you have that level of faith, you can do that. He said, but otherwise, he said, Krishna consciousness doesn't mean it's a challenge to material nature or a challenge to the laws of nature. You know, well, Prahlad did that. Prabhu's, I've got the cyanide today, so it's going to be a test of faith on a scale of 1 to 10. Of course, if you don't pass the test, we have the ambulance out there. And do you want to sign the paper here, where you want to be cremated or buried, and you want to have a Mayapur, Vrindavan? So, you know, that would be like a nice story for the newspaper. Right? Good publicity for Leicester. You know. Hare Krishna cult, test their faith with cyanide. Mahatma Das, resident of Sridham Mayapur, came to test the faith of the Hare Krishna devotees of Leicester by putting cyanide in their prasadam and telling them if they offer it with love and devotion and have faith that Krishna has eaten this, they will not die. Unfortunately, nobody lived. He is now being held in the Leicester jail on charges of mass, suicide? And at least I become famous. You'd all be dead, you know. Sometimes people, these mad people, do things like that so they can get in the newspaper and get some fame. So Prabhupada was saying, you know, so it's an interesting point. You think, look at Prahlad's faith. He had such faith that his faith neutralized the effect of the poison. But Prabhupada said, don't imitate that. So he said, you know, you have to act according to your realization. So it's not that, hey, we're going to challenge nature. We're driving to Rath Yatra on 1 liter of petrol. And Krishna's going to get us there, you know, because I have faith in Krishna. Maybe, if you have a lot of faith, maybe Krishna will expand the petrol. But generally, we don't challenge material nature on that level. But of course, Prahlad basically was. But Krishna, you know, he had the faith, so Krishna was coming, right? So Prabhupada said, act according to your realization. So, fortunately, today we won't have the test of faith. I won't give it to you until I'm certain that you'll pass it. In fact, actually, I could just have a little thing and call it cyanide and put it in your prasadam. It's just water, and you might get sick if you thought it was cyanide. If you had faith it was cyanide, you'd probably get sick eating your prasadam. There was a man who got locked in a walk-in refrigerator because it was a holiday, and so he was cleaning it, and everyone locked up early. And he didn't realize that the office was closing early, so he couldn't get out of the walk-in. So he was stuck in the walk-in for the weekend. And so he knew he was going to freeze to death. So he just wrote a note to his family. He said, what do they call that? Thermal something? Your hypothermia. So he wrote a note and said, I'm going to be dying of hypothermia, and I love you, and so on like that. And so they came on Monday morning, and they did the autopsy, took him, and he died of hypothermia. But the very interesting thing was the walk-in wasn't plugged in, and the temperature was 17 degrees centigrade. So he believed himself into dying because he thought it was freezing. He froze himself to death by his belief. Yeah, it's true. And there's another experiment where control group of people who had the same problem with their knee, and they weren't told what was happening, but they all had surgery, except half of them only had a cut, and they cut their knee and then they sewed it up, and they said, okay, surgery's finished. They didn't do anything. And the other people, the knee was cut and the surgery was done. And a year later, they looked at the recovery of both groups, and both groups were told the surgery was done and the recovery was equal. The group who had the surgery and the group who didn't. Isn't that interesting? But they were all told they had the surgery. So those people healed themselves by believing that they had the surgery. It's true. True story. So then you can kind of understand that Prahlad's faith was such that this is prasadam, so quantum mechanics, your consciousness affects matter. Amazing, huh? So, should we end here and celebrate with prasadam? The moment you're all waiting for. You can celebrate. Class is over, Prabhu. It's time for prasadam. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Go Premanandi. Hari Hari Bol. And goodbye to all of you in Mayapur TV land. We will see you tonight. Tonight, 7 o'clock London time, we're going to do another program if you'd like to join us. Hari Bol.